Aloha Friday, by the way.
It's Aloha Friday. No work
No
till
work till
Tuesday.
Monday. Oh, yes,
Tuesday.
yeah.
It's Labor Day. Aloha no, everyone. This is Uncle Charlie E. Ona.
And this is Mel.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Brought back the Aloha attire. Last couple of Fridays, I just was not in the Aloha spirit because just because of rubbish. But today I felt like, you know what? It's time to bring back the Aloha shirt because it's Aloha Friday. And hoping for better times, bro. I am so excited tonight. We got Dr. Jerome Kim coming on at 7. Dr. Jerome Kim had to return to Hawaii because he for his auntie's funeral. So he's actually flying out tonight. So he's right after our show. He's at his brother's house right after the show. He's on his way to the airport. So I'm hoping he can even stay the whole hour, but we'll squeeze as much factual, science-based information as possible from Dr. Jerome Kim. I'm looking forward to it, man. Looking forward. Hey, you look good today, Charlie. You really look like no, seriously, you look like you're rested and you're ready for the weekend. And the only problem, Charlie, is you don't even really get off on weekends. You're like on call 24/7 with things.
Oh, I gotta go in because to prepare. So, it's one of those things because in my thinking, I'm doing it because I love Kauai and I just want to make sure that, because when you come off, that's the choking point, right? That's the choking point. And I just want to make sure everything is done right. That's all it is. But, I got an understanding spouse in Stephanie that allows me to do what I need to do for the people of Kauai. So
I've always said, Charlie, you and I we are blessed with 2 of the best wives any man could ever ask for. I think all our viewers know that. Wally Nishimura. Wow, Wally, I haven't seen you in a while. Thank you. Yeah, we're all back in the circus, man. We're all back in the circus. Did you take the aspirin? No, I didn't take the aspirin. For those of you that don't know, Jerome Kim is the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute in South Korea. Local boy from Oahu, military, doctor, and then rose through the ranks, and now is the Director General, which is the boss of the International Vaccine Institute. So Jerome is very low key, very humble, very I love when he speaks because he doesn't get excited. He kind of reminds me of me. And but he's like there's a lot of information. Yeah, I wanted to say something.
Okay, you know what, Mel? Just say it because you're gonna say it anyway.
No, I want to really make something real clear, and I know I think I know Charlie's position on this, but it's about the vaccine. It's about the fact that the government has really chosen to vilify those that have chosen not to take the vaccine, and many people have. And at the end of the day, I believe it's a choice. I believe that's your choice. I believe that you have the responsibility to do your due diligence, and after you do your due diligence, you make a decision, understanding one thing. And this is what I wanted to get across, because I see a lot of posts throughout the day. I get a lot of messages. I actually get hate mail from people. But listen, it's like, listen, I'm not pushing the vaccine. I took the vaccine. I encourage everyone to do so. But if you choose not to, I love and respect you just the same. This is the deal. Because the big argument against the vaccine is that you still can get the virus. Why I go take the vaccine? Why I go take that poison? Why I go blah, blah, blah. Listen, the vaccine will prevent you from getting seriously ill or dying. It's not going to prevent you from catching or passing on this virus. Okay? So that's the decision you make. If you can live your life in a bubble, in a safe environment, and you can be disciplined and wear your mask and social distance and you don't take the vaccine, then chances are you'll be okay. But if you're not vaccinated and you're not wearing a mask and you're out in gatherings and congregations of people and partying, then you stand a risk. And that's all I'm trying to say. But at the end of the day, it's your choice. And I don't like this tone that many of our leaders that you see on the news are jamming this vaccination or anti-vaccination people, shoving them down the toilet. I don't think that's right. I think that only creates a bigger divide in our communities when we should be bringing people together. So I just want to get it off my chest because it's been bugging me. It's been bugging me about how that has been the focus. We understand that people know, everybody understands that. But it's time that the government do what they need to do to protect us. And I think that's what's not happening. But don't put it all on the shoulders of the people of Hawaii. That's all. Anyway, thank you for letting me say that, Charlie.
Well, there's one thing I gotta say. There's many out there that cannot take the vaccine, but there are still other measures that you can take. I think what makes it hard is those who refuse to take the vaccine and are reckless in their behavior. That's the ones that will probably end up getting sick, I guess. I mean, I can't say for sure. But, there are ones like those children under the certain age that they cannot take the vaccine. Yes, but that's why schools, we need to ensure their safety because they can't take the vaccine. And, we've had, and the thing about it, Mel, dial back months ago when I first came on and everybody kind of gave me that look like, man, you weird, you stupid. Because I said, okay, take the vaccine, but you're not going to be you're still going to you're going to be a walking asymptomatic. Because at first I was under the impression you take the vaccine, you produce something in you that will kill the vaccine. No, it doesn't. It minimizes, it may kill off some, but it's going to minimize the blow that the virus has on you. It doesn't kill it. And then as time went on, it became more pronounced. Breakthrough cases. I went, aha. That vindicated me because I know there are some out there that say, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Okay. But look where we are today, right? So all I say is, you just err on the side of caution and everything should be okay. We can drop this issue. We can drop, talking about it, but yet it'll be irresponsible of our government not to at least address it. I mean, you spend so much time talking about our travel industry, but you pay very little attention or spread time over those who lost a loved one. At least recognize them. At least say something in their behalf. I think would be, any good politician, because I know there's some good and bad, but the good ones, they actually write to their constituents on their birthdays. So if you're at the top level, shouldn't you at least use some of the media influence that you have and just put a shout out there and just, give your condolences to the families who lost their lives because of this virus? But you don't even do that. So I just wonder if deep down inside, in your na'au, if you really, 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 really care about the people of Hawaii. That's all I'm wondering right now. I don't, and I choose not to debate this vaccine issue anymore. That's just me personally, because I'm just gonna say, use caution and stay safe. If you cannot get vaccinated for medical reasons or whatever the case is, just try to be safe and don't be haphazard in your behavior. Then everything should be okay.
Well said. Thank you very much. That's a great segue for the entry of Dr. Jerome Kim. Again, folks, see when he gets on.
Oh, there he is. I mean, I like that picture. Every time I see that picture, I said, that is distinct.
I'm not seeing his picture. Oh, there it is.
Sorry, I'm in my brother's house in Kailua.
Yeah.
So
Oh, no.
I'll change the to a virtual background just a second.
First of all, Dr. Jerome Kim, Director General, International Vaccine Institute, thank you for joining us tonight. Condolences to your family for the loss of your aunt. I know that you were here for the services, so Please accept our prayers, our condolences. Sorry to hear for your loss.
Yes.
So sorry.
Thanks. Thank you.
And we are so excited to have you here. And you're catching a flight, right? Like shortly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I appreciate you making the time for us. Our viewers appreciate you being here. Lots to talk about. So let's get started. I don't want to hold you back. Lots of things have happened with the vaccine and what's going on in the world, with variants, with boosters, with all of these things. So I'm just going to turn it right over to you, sir. And you can give us an overview, and then we'll take it from there. How's that?
All right. So let's see. Let's start with the variants. So far, what we call the variants of concern, alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, which used to be the UK variant, the South African variant, the Brazilian variant, and the Indian variant, continue. And the Delta variant in particular has become predominant around the world. There are some circulating variants that are of some concern. The World Health Organization calls them variants of interest. The last one was Lambda, and the one that has come up most recently is called Mu, because Mu is the Greek letter. It looks kind of like an M. It comes after Lambda, which is kind of like an L. And it appears to be more resistant or potentially more resistant to some of those infection-fighting proteins that the vaccines and/or natural infection generate. We know that in several places around the world, the pandemic is surging, and this is probably creating new variants. The way variants are created, these mutant viruses, is that during the process of transmission and amplification in a population, the virus variants take hold, and often the most efficient variant becomes predominant, and in this case, Delta, which not only spreads more rapidly, but is associated with higher levels of virus in your blood and in your throat when you get infected, which is one of the reasons why it's more transmissible. But it also has some characteristics that allow it to enter the human body more readily. So, Delta is the one that we're most worried about. And the good news is that if you get 2 doses, if you're fully vaccinated, the vaccines remain effective against Delta variant. We don't know how much longer the vaccines will continue to work. And for that reason, we're getting into the question of boosters, which I think is a natural segue into boosters. So there's a big argument, and a bit is between the people who are arguing that 60% of the world has not been vaccinated, and the people who are saying, well, we have to protect our populations. So what's the real evidence around the boosters? Right now, and actually I think everyone has heard maybe that 2 very senior officials of the Food and Drug Administration have resigned because they believe that they haven't been given adequate time to evaluate the need for boosters. There's been a lot of pressure, and some countries have moved ahead with, like, for instance, Israel, with the use of booster vaccinations. So if you've gotten your full course, you could either get the same vaccine or a different vaccine. That's a separate question. And what we do know is that when you get the booster, in general, the amount of infection-fighting protein in your blood goes up. Now, if this were a primary vaccination, so, say 6 months ago when a lot of people were vaccinated, we know that infection-fighting protein appears to correspond to protection against infection. And at some level now, we know that most of the people who are vaccinated not only are protected individually against infection, but it appears to protect you against severe disease, hospitalization, and death. Which, if you think about, if COVID were just, made you sick, gave you a runny nose and a little bit of cough, it would be like a cold. And that's what the vaccines in general do. They significantly decrease the amount of the number of people who require hospitalization and who die. And that's exactly what we want vaccines to do. The thing is that although we know that the booster doses will raise the level of this neutralizing antibody, the infection-fighting protein, we don't know that it actually keeps more people out of the hospital or makes you less infectious if you get infected after being vaccinated. And those are the big questions that the scientists need to answer, and that we don't have information yet, but the government may move ahead with the booster vaccination. Once the government recommends that, I think people are going to people who are inclined to be vaccinated are going to follow. And we do know in general that the things that are going to be authorized are going to increase the level of infection-fighting protein in your blood. And that may be a good thing, although again, we're not sure. Side effects. So do we know anything more about side effects? So we do know a little bit more about the AstraZeneca vaccine and the blood clots. It appears that at a very, very low level, they do potentially stimulate the formation of these very serious kinds of blood clots. But it's very low level, 1 in 100,000 or fewer. And if we're ready for it, there are ways we can diagnose it and potentially treat it. The Janssen vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, again, very low level, is associated with a kind of paralytic illness called Guillain-Barré. And again, this is even less common than the 1 in 100,000 that we see with blood clots with AstraZeneca. And then there's a problem with some of the RNA vaccines. And again, it's mild in general, but depending on the population, for instance, young men, the frequency may be as high as 1 in 5,000, according to data from Israel, or 1 in 15,000, according to data from the United States. And it causes an inflammation of the heart that appears to be mild and transient and goes away. But again, this is something that we are, I think, concerned about and that we continue to follow. So that covers just about everything.
Okay. Question from Charlie Eona to you, sir. For the vaccine, you say it's basically it builds that infectious fighting antibodies in your body, right? Mm-hmm. But can it reach levels that gets to a point where it starts to neutralize itself?
No. That's a great question, because actually there's something in there. So in general, the higher the level, we think, the more protected you are. At least for the Moderna vaccine, we actually now have data that the infection-fighting proteins appear to correlate with the protection that we see with the vaccine. Protection, again, not against infection, but against mild to severe disease, mild to moderate disease, which is the way they defined it. The thing is that is too much antibody a bad thing? Usually not. But what could happen is the cells that make the antibody could get tired of seeing the same vaccine over and over again. And so this is one of the reasons why some people are recommending, and we certainly are testing, what we call mix and match. We take people who got the AstraZeneca vaccine and we give them the Pfizer vaccine. Or people who got the Pfizer vaccine I know somebody who took the Moderna vaccine afterwards, in order to use something different. So in a way, it's not different, right? We're still getting the immune system to respond to the vaccine, which has a spike protein, the little club things that stick on the outside of the virus model. But you're switching some of the backbone elements, and that allows the immune system potentially to respond better. But it's somewhat complicated. The Brits, who've been at the forefront of some of this work, did a really interesting study where they gave people 2 doses of AstraZeneca, a dose of AstraZeneca, and then a dose of Pfizer. A dose of Pfizer, then a dose of AstraZeneca. So they mixed the order, and then 2 doses of Pfizer. So if you got 2 doses of Pfizer, you had a level like this. If you got AstraZeneca, then Pfizer, you were just a little bit below it, but almost exactly the same level. So AstraZeneca, the weak vaccine first, and then the strong vaccine. If they gave you Pfizer first, and then AstraZeneca, it was half the level. And again, giving the strong vaccine first, followed by the weak vaccine, we don't exactly know the explanation, but this is kind of consistent with what I'd seen when we worked with HIV vaccines. And then if you gave 2 doses of AstraZeneca, you got exactly what you should get, but that level, again, is lower even than the half level that you saw with Pfizer AstraZeneca. So the order of the boosts may make a difference as well. So it gets to a kind of partial answer to your question. Should you get, if you're going to get a booster, should you get the same one or a different one? Right now, the data that the FDA is basing its judgment on is 3 doses of the same thing. But there's increasing data around mixing and matching doses. And some, we're beginning to explore some of that work as well in different countries in the world.
Mm.
Oh. Thank you. I got a bunch of questions coming in from the viewers. We'll try to get to as many as we can. One of them is how effective is the vaccine at preventing transmission?
Oh, that's a great question. And so when we design the studies, and really these are the phase 3 studies, the ones that were done last year. Not a lot of the companies looked at transmission because it's actually a really tough thing. We actually have to send people home with tests. They have to swab themselves and send them in. And that was really difficult to do. Pfizer did it and they saw 60% impact on transmission. AstraZeneca looked and it wasn't statistically significant, but they were just under 50% for prevention of transmission. So, prevention of infection. And Pfizer also prevention of infection. And we would think you prevent infection, you're going to prevent transmission because it's, you don't have an infection, you're not going to transmit it. Formally proving that a vaccine prevents transmission has been much tougher because it requires the kinds of studies that we haven't done yet. And I think many people, including the people that I work with, have been arguing that we really should do this because it's a part of understanding what we call herd protection. So herd protection is not only the protection that you get from getting the vaccine, but it's your ability or the ability of a group of vaccinated people to protect people who haven't been vaccinated or whose responses to vaccine have not been optimal. And it's really amazing. So we work on cholera, which is a diarrheal disease. The cholera vaccine, people would say, it doesn't work that well. It's 55 to 65% efficacy. I mean, compared to, Pfizer, 95% for COVID, right? But if you vaccinate 80% of the people in an Indian city, you see an 85% reduction in cases of cholera. And why? Because the people who are vaccinated are protecting the people who are not vaccinated. And that's what we would like for COVID-19. And originally, I think people were saying, well, 60, 70% will be fine. But with the Delta variant and based on what we know now about transmission and how much the vaccine actually reduces the potential to transmit, we're thinking now it's probably going to be above 80% that we need to get vaccinated. And maybe in the 90% range, which is where it is for measles, which is very highly transmissible. You have to have 90 to 95% vaccination of the population in order to see protection. But the United States has done that. I mean, we are 90 to 95% of Americans have been vaccinated against measles. That means when, a kid with measles comes and visits Disneyland, he may infect one person who will infect another person, but you don't see these massive, 50,000 person outbreaks of measles the way you would in a country that doesn't have high levels of measles vaccination. And so will we need that for COVID? Possibly. And I think that's one of the things that Dr. Fauci was talking about a week ago.
Mm-hmm. Now, Doc, is there a way that when you have a population that's vaccinated and a population that's unvaccinated, if there's a way of measuring when those two populations say they're in a certain area to try to see how effective one is working along with the other? Because it seems like, every time we hear this community spread, I picture it as a full-on saturation point that it seems almost impossible to get rid of all these infections. And so from what I'm hearing is that if you have someone who's been vaccinated, they're sort of like the plant, right? You plant them in that population base, hoping that will kind of cut off the spread, right? Or what you try to do. But is there a way of actually measuring that type of situation?
That effect. Yeah. So we do studies in a number of different ways to look at the impact of vaccination on transmission in population. So but these are fairly large studies, And the best way to do them is probably to use geopositioning. So actually, it's true, we'll go through a town and basically geo-label all the houses and know where everyone lives and, the people who live in families. And then we vaccinate people. And then, if a person becomes infected, we can look at their family members to see what the rate of transmission is. You can also model it. And the problem with models is, they're based on how good your information is to begin with. And so I think we're getting more information now on how to do modeling around this. But right now, the numbers are still a little bit soft, which means that the models aren't going to be, we say we have to validate the model. So, you imagine a scientist, right? A guy working behind a computer sets up this model and it's beautiful, right? And then he has to enter data into it and he enters it in and it gets reported and the news picks it up. And then all of a sudden you have an infection in the community and then you get real information. And then you have to look at your model and say, it might not be exactly what I thought. We're going to have to change this, change that, but that's the scientific process. And, we want the models to be accurate. But right now we don't have really accurate models. And, but we're getting really interesting information. Those populations that are highly vaccinated, although they have infections, the infections don't lead to as many hospitalizations. And that's what really matters. I mean, the last thing you want is for your hospitals to be full. So all the elective surgeries get canceled. You're discouraged from coming to the emergency room. People get scared. So it really is important that, communities achieve very high levels of vaccination. And the other part is we wear masks. And we wear masks not necessarily, they do protect you. They offer some level of protection to you directly. The real reason to wear a mask is you never know if your grandma who got vaccinated back in January is still protected. And so you're wearing that mask for all the other people that you talk to, that you interact with, that you work with, and it's a big problem now because kids, they're in school now. Mm-hmm. And you know how tough it is to get them to wear masks and do these things. If they get infected in school, they spread it to their friends. The friends are going to go home and they have parents and, or other caregivers and grandparents and you can make them sick. So the reason to wear masks is really not only to protect yourself, but to protect others. Because we know that the vaccines are really good. They keep you out of the hospital, but you can still spread the infection. Maybe not as well as if you're unvaccinated. Because one of the interesting things is they've done some studies now. If you're vaccinated and get infected, the amount of virus in your blood may be lower. And you have virus in your nose and throat, so spreadable virus, for a shorter period of time. If that's the case, then that is another way that vaccines prevent spread in a community. But again, we really need better information on this. And it's a more difficult study to do. But it's really critical information, particularly if, in the United States, we have, Pfizer, we have Johnson & Johnson and Moderna. And at some point we'll have Novavax. And these have very high levels of efficacy. If you're in another country that has another WHO-approved vaccine, but the efficacies are between 50 and 70%, this kind of information about spread and how we deal with it could be really important and make a huge difference.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to say thank you, Doc. We just had Melissa Owana, one of our viewers, who just decided after hearing you speak, in addition to what she heard last night from our 3 doctors, that she's going to go get the vaccine. She was on the fence, and I get emotional when these people post that because that's what we try to do. We try to provide the information. So Melissa Owana, congratulations and thank you for sharing.
Can I remind people about one thing? So, in addition to doing research on vaccines, I really like to read about history and history of medicine. And I think, one of the things I learned, because, we work in an island called Fiji, which isn't a part of Polynesia, but they're one of the island nations in the Pacific. And they had a problem just like we did in Hawaii. When Westerners came to Fiji, the presence of measles wiped out 60% of the Fijian population. 60% measles. You know, this is back in the 19th century. They didn't have vaccines. The same thing happened in Hawaii because it was a population that hadn't seen these diseases before. If we had vaccines, we could have protected them. The same thing is true of COVID. And so the reason this story is interesting is there was a measles outbreak in Samoa a year and a half ago. And Fiji said, you know, we got to fix this. So they went out and they started, you know, telling everyone, you remember what happened in the 19th century. Fiji was wiped out by measles. You need to be vaccinated. And they got older people who'd been naturally infected coming in and insisting they wanted to get vaccinated. Vaccination is really important because it does prevent illness and save lives. And it, you know, if we'd had these vaccines in the 19th century, Hawaii and many of the islands in the Pacific would be a very, very different place. So it's really important. Vaccination is really critical.
Yeah. I did want to say, you mentioned, you know, when it gets to a point where the emergency rooms get full, ICUs get full, and we got to start turning away or canceling elective surgeries. That's where we are right now. I'm sure you've been following the news while you're here. I'm worried. I think a lot of us are worried because, you know, the medical community has been basically pleading that we need to do something now because we don't have the time. You know, 2 more weeks, there'll be, in fact, one doctor today, Dr. Dworkin said, if we don't change what's going on with this surge, then they're going to get to a point where they have to choose who lives and who dies. That's how critical it is on the Big Island. And it's scary. And Oahu is the same way. And all these hospitals are just filling up. So I don't know what the short-term response is. Vaccinations take time to become effective, but we gotta do some things. One question that you brought up, history, and I thought there was a perfect segue. One of our viewers asked, how did the Spanish flu go away after 2 years, pretty much on its own? And I'm not familiar how it went away. This is from a viewer. How did the Spanish flu go away after 2 years on its own and COVID's still going?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So COVID is a lot more transmissible than the Spanish flu, particularly the Delta variant. You know, the original COVID was a little more transmissible than flu. The Delta variant is as transmissible as chickenpox, which is much, much more transmissible. People didn't travel as much. You know, I mean, the introduction of Delta variant to Hawaii happened because people are traveling. I mean, in the days when you had ships, it would take, you know, a week and a half, 2 weeks if you were on a sailing ship to get to Hawaii. That's not the case anymore. You know, 5 hours and or 6 hours or 7 hours and you're in the mainland, depending on where you want to go. Or someone from the mainland is here. And so international travel has been a, you know, major route for spread. You know, Fiji had almost no cases because actually I almost got trapped there because we were there when they closed the borders and they weren't letting anyone in and they didn't have any cases until a case snuck in. And then they had a huge outbreak. But again, now that they have vaccine, they've vaccinated a significant portion of their population. But yeah, so Spanish flu went away in 2 years, but at the same time, they killed hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, it was the major pandemic of the last 100 years. Now, I say that cholera, which is again a disease that we study, has been a pandemic since 1960. We're in the same pandemic; it just has never gone away. But it doesn't kill, 4.5 million people in a year and a half.
Go ahead, Mel.
No, I'm good.
So I guess my other question is, given the state that we're in now here in Hawaii, and looking at these numbers, how it's just climbing exponentially, right? I've always, lived here my whole life and realized as you get older that Hawaii is really a transient location because you've got the residents that live here, but the other numbers are constantly moving. So it never stays stagnant. It's always moving in and out. So I look at that as possibly the contribution to the numbers rising, because it's almost like a depository, right? Come in, do their thing, move out, but yet they leave things behind, and it's constantly moving. Do you think that we need to shut off the inbound just for a period of time to get a grip on it and see how much we can drop it? Because if we say, if they do say, has been talk has been going around that a lockdown of 21 days, if we don't see anything, then we're in deep kimchi, because what
Yeah.
will it take to drop the numbers, right? And I think that's what the focus is right now, because as long as we have negligent behavior or just behavior that's unbecoming, it's very hard to talk sense into really wanting to fight this thing the proper way, because everyone needs to buy into it so we can bring it down, right?
Yeah. So there's no doubt that that shutting down and locking down is one of the best ways to buy time. I mean, because really that's all it is, right? And in that time that you have, then you vaccinate more people, you bring more supplies, for instance, of oxygen into the state. You give the healthcare providers a rest, but by itself, it's a part of a solution, right? I mean, because you can't deprive 60% of the state of its income.
Right.
The state would not be sustainable. So you have to find a balance, and it's tough because there's no book on how to do it right. So, for instance, in Korea, right, it's really interesting. When we left to come for the funeral, it was limited to 2 people after 6 o'clock. So after 6 o'clock, if you went to a restaurant, you could only have 2 people. And at 9 o'clock, everything went to takeout only. And at home, your family was allowed to meet. But if you had someone in your house, no more than 2 people. So now Korea is getting close to 60%. And so this is just in the last 10 days. The government has said, well, you can do 4 people if 2 of them are vaccinated, or 6 people if 4 of them are vaccinated. So now you're thinking, well, would that work in the United States? I mean, could we count on the people having said that they were vaccinated being vaccinated? I mean, you hear all these stories about fake ID cards or fake vaccination cards and things. If you make it too complicated, it really is hard for public health authorities to watch this and do the right thing. So another story, I worked in Thailand for 4 years, and we did an HIV vaccine trial there with the U.S. military. And but it was hard to do the trial because the number of HIV cases, in the time it took us to get the vaccine and get the trial started, the number of HIV cases dropped to almost nothing, almost 0. Why? Because the Thais figured out that it was because of commercial sex workers who were the cause of transmission. So what they did was, although commercial sex work is technically illegal, they said, okay, we're going to visit all the places. If you're not using condoms, we'll shut you down. So they did. They gave you a warning. If you didn't follow, the next time they came to visit, the big yellow tape went across your door. And that got 100% use. But you have to have that kind of public health spirit. That means that tracking, people have to consent to be tracked. And, I still get warnings about, I was in a place potentially where there's a exposure. If you were at this athletic club between 10:30 in the morning and 12 noon, and you were in the following exercise room, then you may have been exposed. You need to be tested. But can we do that? There are so many things that, now a year and a half later, it's more difficult to put into place because, people have seen the light at the end of the tunnel. They've tasted a little bit of liberty. It's hard to go backwards now. And I'm sure that's what the president at the national level is thinking, gosh, we're at 70%. We should be, doing great. But we know that there are parts of the country where vaccination rates were low. And, it's these pockets, even within a state of people who are not vaccinated. If there are enough, then there's going to be transmission. And I think we're seeing that. It's not an easy solution. And, the leaders of the state and or counties really have to think carefully about what they hope to achieve with the different measures, because we know a lot of the transmission is occurring in familiar settings. If you go on the street in Korea, everyone still is wearing a mask. If you go to my working place, when they're walking in the halls, everyone has a mask on. But we know that transmission is occurring, and where is it occurring? It's occurring because you're having, you're meeting a friend at home, or, you happen to go, this is before the 2-person maximum. You go out and you go to sing karaoke and the masks are off and you're singing at the top of your lungs in a tiny little room with a bunch of your best friends, and, and that's where transmission is occurring. So we have to find out where transmission is occurring and look to prevent it at those locations. But that's hard. And it really requires almost a different level of public health monitoring than is possible at this point.
Okay.
But when you get to a crisis point like we are now, I think your options are very minimal. You don't have many options at this point because we're so close to the doctors or nurses and representatives already saying that the standard of care will drop if we don't change. And I don't know of any other mitigation measure that would drop the spike quickly, other than a stay-at-home order or something like that. We've backed ourselves into a wall, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And now your options are limited, where we had more options early on.
Yes.
Doc, Novavax. What's the story on Novavax? I honestly, and let me just say, I have followed a few of your interviews on YouTube. You belong to all kinds of cabinet positions now. You're like a leading expert in the world on vaccine. Yes, you are, and I'm sort of like tickled to have you on. But you've said many times that this is a worldwide crisis, and until we can get the world vaccinated, we're not going to really get through this thing completely. And that's, I heard you mention that on several of your interviews. But Novavax, what's the story on Novavax?
So Novavax hasn't been able to hasn't formally been approved by the FDA. And they announced their results in January. These small companies sometimes have issues when they're scaling up, when they're going from the small batches you make to do the tests to the big batches you need in order to convince the FDA that you can make a vaccine high quality the same way over and over again. And there's a Korean company working with Novavax as well to manufacture the vaccine in Korea. And I think that they believe that they have now everything down to the point where it's ready. But they're waiting for the US FDA to give its seal of approval. And the FDA is one of the toughest regulatory agencies in the world, which is a good thing if you're American, on the one hand. But, for Novavax, again, I have a colleague, a very famous vaccine person. She says, well, I'm waiting for Novavax. I got my RNA vaccine, but Novavax is the one that's going to make a big difference. We're waiting. And manufacturing issues can be a problem. Moderna wasn't as quick as Pfizer to get massive production of RNA vaccine. Moderna is this tiny little biotech company. This is its first hit, right? Pfizer's, one of the most profitable vaccine companies we know, and they know how to make vaccines. And so when they are going to do something, they can do it. The smaller companies have an issue, so they need to partner with other organizations. And it really does require sometimes not re-engineering, but you have to go back and redo the process so that it can be repeated at a giant scale, so that you can make 1 billion doses a year rather than 30 million doses. And that, not all companies can do that.
Oh. So the other thing is, what do you foresee in the future as far as, you talked a little bit about it, watching these mutations occur right in the beginning. I mean, it seems like science is trying its best to kind of get ahead of it, but we're basically in a reactive mode right now. And it's probably we're going to be that way for a long, long while until we can bring this under control. What do you
Yeah.
see happening in the future? The
So,
direction.
so I hate to admit that I was wrong, but in the beginning, I thought, maybe with, we were in the first wave back then. You remember
Mhm.
it was over a year ago now. And I was thinking, if we can keep this under control and get the vaccine rolled out fast enough, then maybe we can stop this. But at this point now, with the different variants, with Delta just about everywhere, only China has, maybe now New Zealand has been able to control it by jumping on it very aggressively and locking down cities. It's I think that we're going to be living with the variants for a while until we can get enough vaccine. And so how much vaccine? 8 billion people in the world, start with 2 doses, that's 16 billion. Maybe we need a booster or a variant vaccine, one that works against all the variants or one that works specifically against Delta, for instance. And that's another 8 billion. So that's 24 billion doses. In a good year, we make 500 million doses of flu vaccine. We've already given about 5 billion doses of COVID vaccine. I mean, we've taken what we normally make and we've multiplied it by 10 for a single vaccine. And we're not anywhere near vaccinating everybody. So, I think the vaccines that we have now that are approved, we need them in far greater numbers. A number of additional vaccines are coming online with tests being done, what we call phase 3, with other companies that have capacity to manufacture lots and lots of vaccine. I'm hoping that those companies actually, we know that many of the companies are working on the next generation vaccine. So vaccines against Delta or the variants. And then a couple of companies, actually not a couple, several of the companies are working on vaccines that should work against a lot of different variants. So maybe what we call a universal COVID vaccine. And that would be great because it would offer you potentially the opportunity to get a single boost that would cover everything. Those vaccines are now at least in phase 2 with some of the companies, and hopefully we'll have phase 3 trials testing them at the end of this year and the beginning of next year. So early to mid next year, we might be seeing results from these universal vaccines. And that, those universal vaccines have come up very quickly. With flu, we've been working on universal vaccines for a long time, and we're nowhere near as far along. So maybe, with COVID, again, it'll be a lesson that we learned that we can use for other vaccines as well.
So on a follow-up, real fast follow-up now, with regards to the question I had asked earlier. So in your experience, seeing all these variants, how it popped up, is this variant, or and I'll call it a natural creation, because it should, you touched on it before, that it doesn't look like it was man-made, right? Well, the COVID itself. Does it take that many years for something just of this magnitude to pop up?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We have lived, mankind has lived in, not in harmony, because it's hard to be in harmony with a virus that's out to kill you. But we've been living with these viruses because we live with animals and we eat them and work with them and play with them. And, same is true with influenza and ducks and chickens and pigs. And, with COVID and these actually a variety of different animals, we think it probably started with a bat. I mean, the US intelligence agencies did a, months-long investigation into whether this was lab-made or man-made. And they came up with the same, kind of answer that we had, which was, we can't really tell. It could very well be natural. Maybe there were some things that humans did that made it more likely to jump. But we can't tell at this point. And really, the goal is to make 24 billion doses of vaccine before this gets even more out of hand. And if you had to focus your energy on something, let's work on a vaccine, well, making enough vaccine, but work on vaccines that will work against a lot of the different variants. there are other groups that are working on what we call a universal coronavirus vaccine. So, these coronaviruses like COVID-19 exist in multiple different forms. The SARS virus that was present in 2003 to 2004, SARS-1, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, which was, it's been known since 2012, but there's a big outbreak in Korea in 2015. So these universal coronavirus vaccines could theoretically work against all of them. And that actually is really important because coronaviruses are one of those viruses that, just the animals that they infect have lots of opportunity to infect humans, the same way influenza viruses do. And, until we find a way to prevent that kind of transmission, we're going to have continued exposure to coronaviruses. Not all of them will be like COVID-19, luckily. But it's, we know about them. Hopefully we're tracking them. Hopefully we're watching the animal populations in China and elsewhere, because that's where the next pandemic will come as well. Out of these, not out of China necessarily, but out of these viruses that equally live with humans and with animals.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Doc, what would you say to someone who's contemplating getting a vaccine, but are concerned because a lot of talk has been about these different variants that may be resistant to the existing vaccines? What would you say to those people? I'm assuming it's go get the vaccine now anyway, but what would you say?
Okay,
I think it's a valid question. Like, hey, okay,
Yeah.
you're telling me to get the vaccine, but you're also telling me that these lambdas and mu's and whatever is next may be resistant. So what would you tell these people?
Yeah, so right now what we're seeing is the vaccines work maybe less well. And right now all we have is test tube data, right? In a test tube, lambda and mu are more difficult to neutralize, but we can still neutralize them. We can still, the infection fighting proteins will still prevent them from doing damage. We actually have data, like human data from the real world, that the vaccines, that full dose of vaccine, both AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, are effective against Delta variant and against Gamma and against Beta and Alpha. So against the variants that we know of, the vaccines work. They're highly effective, probably 85 to 96% effective in preventing hospitalization. I mean, and actually, it's odd because, some of the vaccines are not terribly efficacious, right? There's a Chinese vaccine called Sinovac that's somewhere between 50 and 60%, but its effectiveness is much higher in preventing hospitalization and death. Now, is it better to get Sinovac and a second vaccine, like an AstraZeneca vaccine? Actually, there's just data today that was published out of Thailand that said, well, we see really great responses if we boost the Sinovac vaccine recipients with another vaccine. Again, these things are hot off the press. They haven't been fully reviewed yet, but it provides more hope that we have solutions still that will work against variants and against large outbreaks. So, I have a friend who works in Thailand, and he's running their vaccine program. And I said, well, he said, well, Sinovac is still effective at preventing disease, and they vaccinated all their healthcare workers very quickly with this Chinese vaccine, and they're seeing infections, but they're not being hospitalized. And I said, well, that's a good outcome. And he goes, yes, except that we make them quarantine for 2 weeks, and if enough of your nurses and doctors are out in quarantine, it's hard to take care of people, which is absolutely true. I mean, we think, you prevent death, but in certain groups of people, populations of people like healthcare workers, you really need to protect them, because the other things that they do, an infected healthcare worker has the potential to spread it to others.
Scary.
Wow. Doc, I work in a profession now that I take care of the airports here on Hawaii. And that's the thing that I always worried about. If I get a group of my security professionals, they get wiped out by the virus or Delta, because of all the restrictions and all the required training they need, it's almost impossible to pick some people up on the spot to cover those areas. And that's always been my fear. So, and it's just like your organization, right? Highly trained, highly skilled, all licensed. If you take 1/4 out of the mix, your practice really needs to shut down for a while until they can get it restarted, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what my colleague was saying, that you can't replace the nurses and doctors. I mean, that they have a national healthcare system. Everyone has free care in Thailand. But if enough of the workforce is out, those people who are left, who are already tired from taking care of COVID patients and routine care, are just wiped out by the pandemic. And I think you're right. And this gets to another reason why masks and we think that the vaccine is all we need, but in fact, there's a lot of additional thinking that we ourselves have to remember, that when we started using masks and gloves and face shields in the hospitals, the rate of infection in healthcare workers really went down. If there's enough of an outbreak in a community, the risk is not at work, the risk is at home.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not going to wear all that protective equipment when you're at home. And that's, there's always a weak spot, right? And the virus always finds it. And so we have to be really careful. I mean, assuming that the vaccines, and that all the other things that we do aren't protecting us. In fact, it's when we take them off. And actually, we know that from the flu. Healthcare workers who are masked and gloved and take care are not really, they are protected to some degree, but they're not protected from infections at home because they're not wearing all those things at home.
So is there in your profession, when you have, say, individuals that work long hours, their resistance level naturally goes down, right? So is it that the resistance as well, their natural resistance to fight off certain infections go down as well from just those long hours of working?
So we've often said that things like stress can affect your immune system.
Okay.
It's very hard to measure. These are, I imagine an ER nurse, or my mother was a respiratory therapist in a children's hospital. I mean, they're under stress all the time, different kind of stress. But yeah, overwork and you get sloppy. When you're tired and you've just been working too long, and I know this, and you know it too. I mean, and it's those times when your guard slips because you're tired, and you're not, you're cutting corners or you're doing something to get it done, and that's when something happens. So the healthcare workers tend to be younger in general, so they have fairly strong immune responses. They might actually be naturally boosted as well because they're exposed to virus. The vaccine-induced immune responses go higher if you get exposed to virus, but don't come down with active COVID. But there are a lot of things that we don't know. And yeah, I think all of us worry that I think actually Dr. Fauci said, yeah, there could be a variant out there that isn't where the vaccines aren't gonna work anymore. So far, we haven't found it. And hopefully we never do, knock on wood.
Yeah, I hope not. I know it's already 7:45. You got a flight to catch. I got so many questions, but we're gonna have to just. I have a question that it's a common question, and it's one that I know you spoke of in one of our prior shows. But the viewer has had her third shot, her first booster, and she did not have any reaction other than pain in the arm. Should she be concerned that it's not working, or it was a weak dose? Or I've heard this question a lot of times.
So it's funny. So no, we think that the third dose, that the administration of the third dose, the immune response to it should happen regardless of whether or not you feel a lot of pain or not. It started as one of these things where you knew that the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine was working because your arm got really sore, or you had some swollen lymph nodes or big red inflamed spot. But in fact, the important thing is that we know that 90 to 95% of people have very strong responses to the vaccine, and the booster doses provide even higher levels of protection, or actually this infection fighting protein, than the original doses. So hopefully, the data that we're seeing with Pfizer will be borne out for the other vaccines as well. I think Moderna and Johnson & Johnson actually has provided preliminary evidence that there's the second dose of Johnson & Johnson also gives you a big boost. So I haven't experienced my booster dose yet, but hopefully it's not going to be worse than the first one.
But I get the question is, the fact that maybe you didn't get the fever and the chills and all of that stuff does not mean that you got a weak dose, or it's yeah. My daughter
No.
just
I
had
think
her first shot. She had absolutely no reaction other than a little sore arm. My wife just got floored. So, but
yeah, not everyone does. I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny because and I've had the same question from people in Korea who haven't had much reaction to their first dose. But sometimes the second dose is worse. My daughter's second dose she had a fever. So we don't want a vaccine to be to give us 100% side effects. No one want to take it. When I got the anthrax vaccine going to Afghanistan, I can tell you it got worse with every dose. But they warn you, and every vaccine is different. So again, these vaccines that we have are so highly studied now. I mean, we've very rarely given, 5 billion doses in 12 months, or actually less than 12 months. And so there's a huge amount of experience with all of the vaccines now.
Well, Doc, one last question for you. Someone had asked, one of the viewers had asked, besides the vaccine, is there medicines that someone can take, especially if they're kind of maybe thinking straying away from the vaccine? I know we've talked a lot about the vaccine tonight, and we know what it can do. But is there, what is that ivermectin, and again, hydroxychloroquine is popping up again. And, there's this kind of convincing data about the hydroxychloroquine, what it can do and what it can't do. So is there anything else out there that you know of?
No. So, and I think that there's hope that we will have something. Right now, ivermectin definitely does not. Hydroxychloroquine definitely does not. And I would say that there's hope because, in the HIV field, I come out of the HIV vaccine field, and they've made far more progress in being able to give people drugs that are effective against HIV that will also prevent HIV infection if you take them either before you have exposure or just after you do. We don't have anything like that yet for COVID-19. There's some thought that maybe these monoclonal antibodies that are really expensive and also have side effects, if you inject it and give a long-acting form, that it may protect you, but you have to be re-injected fairly frequently. So again, better to take a vaccine that protects you for 8 months or a year and a half, depending on the vaccine, than have to, take medicine all the time. The problem here is that, with HIV, you have to know that you were exposed, or you have to take the medicine all the time. So if you're healthy, why would you want to take medicine? Whereas the vaccine is a, one-off. You get vaccinated, or maybe you get 2 doses of vaccine and you're done. With medicines, you have to remember to take it every day. And, so I'm on blood pressure medicine. I think I'm pretty good at taking it every day. But, anyone who's on medicine will tell you, well, yeah, I missed yesterday's dose. Or our trick question when you're a doctor is to say, did you take last night's dose of high blood pressure medicine? And people will go, yeah, I don't think I did, doctor. And that tells us, well, maybe they miss, just more than last night's dose. But again, these are, when you think about things, right? A vaccine is kind of like a fire and forget. You get your vaccine dose. Still, maybe you're wearing a mask. You're still trying to keep distance because you want to reduce your risk of getting infected. But the vaccine dose protects you. When you're taking medicine, or if you take a medicine after you've been exposed, the problem with COVID is we never know when we've been exposed or to whom we've been exposed, who may be transmitting. And that's the big problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the talk of the town right now, with those all those other medications that are being pushed, and a lot of YouTube videos about it. Doc, we're gonna cut you loose. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have?
Oh, no. Yeah,
Oh.
I give talks to doctors groups in the Philippines and elsewhere as well, and there are a lot of people who have questions like that. So yeah.
We'll see. We appreciate you being on, and I know, like I said, I know you got a plane to catch. I cannot thank you enough for taking some time out, for joining us and our viewers. We really appreciate it. You clarified a lot of things for a lot of people. I'm reading the comments. That's why my eyes are either on going down or up. I'm reading comments, trying to catch as many questions as we can. You just clarified a lot of things for a lot of people. So thank you for that. Any closing thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I think it's really important that everybody in the state get vaccinated, and that we continue to protect ourselves and others. I mean, the beauty of Hawaii is that everyone looks out for everyone else, right? My aunt, who just passed away, she was famous for helping everybody. Well, how do we help people with this? We stop the generation of mutants by getting vaccinated. We protect ourselves and we protect others by getting vaccinated. We wear a mask, not only to protect ourselves, but to protect other people. So for all the things that we do in Hawaii for other people, I mean, the most courteous drivers in the world are in Hawaii. We should take that same approach when we think about this disease. And we've been fighting it for a year and a half. We're all tired of it. Let's all work together and get rid of it.
Good.
Awesome.
Oh, my wife's telling me we got to go.
Yeah, Charlie.
Well, thank you very much. You go catch that flight and have a safe trip back home. And thank you, and stay safe. Stay safe.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Mel.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you. Safe travels. We'll be in touch. Hope to get you on in the near future. You take care, my friend.
All right. Thank you.
Aloha. Aloha.
Aloha.
Oh man. All right.
Yeah.
Charlie.
Well,
your closing thoughts. We have to let him cut him loose, but I imagine this guy, world renowned. This guy is appointed to the South Korean cabinet. This guy sits on boards, multiple international boards. This is an expert of the highest scale. So I hope you guys got some information that will help you. Charlie.
It baffles me that when we have someone of this caliber, I'm saying this with all sincerity, that I hope our viewers got a glimpse of this brilliant mind and what he does. And he's looking out for the human race, because there's so many things out there that at one time there were so many thousands of Hawaiians, right? And look at our population now. We're just a tiny fraction. And I said this before. I said, I'm my father's only son. So the lineage I have stepchildren, and a lot of people corrected me, they're still your children. But if we had to measure by blood, I'm my dad's only son. And once I leave this earth, his line stops. Paul Iona stops. And so that's why when I listen to this man talk and the information that he's sharing, I am so grateful that there's somebody out there with wings. He's like an angel. And I hope and pray that, many of us tonight was able to catch catch a glimpse of what he was trying to say. You know, Hawaii is a very tiny speck on this big globe. If you look at the relation of that tiny speck compared to other big states, we're sort of like that enclosed area that they talk about that's dangerous when we don't have our mask and we're enclosed in this tiny little space, because probably you can get infected much greater than if you was in a wide open space. I want everybody just to relate to that and just say, you know what? If something happens to us here, we have no place to run. We're just on this island. But we call this home, many of us call this home. For our visitors, you probably never understand that. You know, the cost of living is high. It's very easy for us to say, okay, I'll go move to the mainland or whatever. But no, many of us have elected to stay here because this is our home and we cherish everything we have. Again, I just hope and pray that if you elect the route of not getting vaccinated, it's okay. I am not going to scold you, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. I can only hope and pray that you do whatever activities you do in a safe manner, because there's just too many people sick in the hospitals now, and you don't have to add to that. But if you do, just remember one thing: you definitely will be by yourself. Your family will not be able to come and see you. It's not going to happen. And I don't wish that upon my worst enemy. Okay? So just, if there's anything you're going to take away with what Uncle Charlie says, just remember that. We all want to be loved. I love you, and I just hope and pray you make the right decision for you. Not for Uncle Charlie, not for anybody else. But at the same token, let's think about others that we could infect if we ourselves get infected. So when people ask me, Uncle, why did you get vaccinated? I love my wife. I love my children. I love my neighbors. I don't want to be the asymptomatic carrier. Okay. And I'm always going to be safe. And I'm always going to do what is responsibly right to do. Okay. Mel?
Awesome, Charlie. That's straight from the heart, man. I mean, you know, you can tell when somebody's sincere and genuine, and thank you, Charlie, for that. You know, guys, again, like Charlie said, I hope you guys can appreciate the message from Dr. Kim. This guy, he works internationally. He studies. You heard him talk about the hot off the press new study out of, I think he said was Thailand today. I mean, you talk about a guy who's up to speed on all that concerns vaccines and COVID. So I hope you guys can appreciate Dr. Kim taking the time to be with us tonight. He's here. He was here for his aunt's funeral. And as you can see, his wife saying, hey, we got to go. Stop. He cares so much for this place. Remember, he lives in South Korea, but he's from Oahu, and he's a local boy. So share this if you can with your friends, your relatives, because I think it's important information. Whether you agree, disagree, doesn't matter. It's important information that you can, we hope that you will share. There was a lot of questions we couldn't get to. I apologize. One of the things I don't want to do with Dr. Kim is cut him off, because his positions hasn't really changed at all from when we first had on our show last year, Charlie. He comes from a country that was wide open and relatively COVID-free for a long time, because they were strict on the contact tracing and masks and all of that. Mm-hmm. He comes from a country that when spikes started to happen, they took action immediately to prevent the shutdown of businesses. So he comes from that country that is emphasis is on health and safety of their citizens, unlike what we're seeing here in Hawaii. So I hope he took his comments to heart. The best thing you could do is share this with someone that's on the fence, someone that's looking for information from somebody that knows what they're talking about. This videos, along with all our videos. I see a lot of new people on here tonight that I don't recognize the names. You can catch all of our shows on my YouTube channel, Mel Raposo, and every single episode is on there. Feel free to go check it out. All right, guys. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Charlie, we'll probably take Monday off for holiday, Labor Day, unless something drastic happens in the state that we want to share with you all or want to discuss. But we definitely will be
Well,
back on Tuesday.
just remember, I put out that offer, and, you know, and if it pops up, maybe we might even do one this weekend. Who knows?
You never know.
Yeah, you
You
never,
never know.
you
Yeah.
never know.
On Tuesday, we'll have Dr. Kapono Chung Hansen and Dr. Akiona. And they're going to talk about, I don't know, we're going to have fun with them though.
Well, we know that Dr. Akiona is still blazing it on the Big Island, right? And
Yeah.
we're gonna ask her about that, how it's going.
Yeah.
So,
I think they wanna chat and have a discussion about the Hawaii Kapono and Dr. Akiona, both Native Hawaiians, have amazing information on our history and culture. And I love hearing from people like that. You know,
well,
because I think the aloha.
that leaves me out, Mel.
I think the aloha spirit, our culture from this place, is what's going to carry us to. But you guys all stay home. You
Yep.
stay home while the tourists run free. While the tourists has their luau's of 300 people buffet style. You guys stay home, or you go get a ticket.
And Mel, shame on you, Charlie, because when those two come on, I know they're going to be Olelo, Hawaii, right? Talking in Hawaiian, and me just going to be quiet in my corner because I got to admit, I went to Kamehameha, but I goofed off. When I should have been learning, I was checking the scenery out, you know, if you know what I mean. So my Hawaiian is almost 0 to 0.
Yeah, we'll have fun.
Yeah.
So we'll see you guys. Like I say, if anything pops up, you guys really, and this is not alcohol.
Oh, it was alcohol, gang. You'd be hearing the.
You guys, on a serious note, you guys stay safe, guys. Stay safe. Let's clip this thing. We got to do it on our own. Okay. So you guys stay safe. Take care. God bless. We'll see you guys shortly.
Aloha.